Hey, so for this video I wanted to talk about the anxiety that you experience as a result of having an eating disorder. And it's not completely obvious because not all of the anxiety that you experience is related to food and eating. So for this video I wanted to identify these anxious thoughts and the behaviours that they ultimately make you perform. I then want to go on to talk about why it's important to surmounting these behaviours in the long run to recovering from an eating disorder and how you can go about doing it. At the end I'll give you an example of something that I've done on my own road to recovery. So when it comes down to it, an eating disorder isn't just an eating disorder, it's an anxiety disorder. The problem is that an anxiety disorder has many branches to it, and when you have an eating disorder, it just so happens that one of those branches are related to food and eating. And when you're living with the eating disorder, you begin to control a lot of what you're eating, how you eat, and ultimately you lose a lot of weight along the way. And this is what becomes immediately obvious to those around you and to the doctors that treat you. So you're labelled with having the eating disorder. And in many ways this isn't completely helpful, because when you then go on to recovering, you focus so much on the eating component that the other components of your anxiety disorder become neglected in a way. And this isn't completely helpful because all of these points that you haven't acted upon are points that you can then relapse to if you recover from the eating disorder component. And this is what I feel ultimately happened to me. So when I was first admitted to Rhodes Farm, they heavily looked upon the eating component and the weight restoration. And so even though when I completed my Rhodes Farm treatment and I went back into the real world, the eating component was sorted. I was doing a lot better in that sense. But now that I look back on it, there are other components that still cause me anxiety, and one of those components was cleanliness. So it got into my head that a lot of things were dirty, and if I didn't keep completely clean, I would become ill. So I found myself washing my hands a lot of the time, and this ultimately it's caused lots of cracks to develop in my hand. But I would still go and wash my hands because I was so anxious that I'd become ill, and this hurt because of the cracks in my hand. And these were irrational behaviours, but because these weren't focused on in my recovery, I just continued to perform these behaviours. And ultimately, the anxiety in the broad sense wasn't dealt with, so I could then go on to relapse from the eating disorder. So this highlights the point that when you have an anxiety disorder, it's very, very difficult to dissociate between what you know is normal and what other people see as abnormal behaviours. And so what I urge you to do is to almost take a blog of the behaviours that you perform on a day-to-day basis for a few weeks. And don't look at it, just keep on writing down. And a few weeks later I then urge you to look at that blog and look at it from a very objective point of view, and try to identify in that blog what you can see as abnormal or anxiety-induced behaviours. And you have to be quite critical in this sense, because if you fail to see things as irrationally induced behaviours, you then won't go on to sort of trying to sort them out, and from that a relapse can develop. So try and be very critical, and don't just dismiss things as this is what I normally do, because these anxiety-induced behaviours are almost habitual in a sense. So you really have to be objective in that point of view. And it might help that get a friend to have a look, and maybe they can help identify things that are abnormal. And then what I want you to do is to list these behaviours from things that you deem to be easiest to surmount to those that are the most difficult things to try and get over. And from then on, you have to then try and surmount each of these behaviours, from the top of the list to the bottom of the list. And this is, I've said this before, it is important in your recovery from the eating disorder, because a relapse can develop if you don't underpin all of the things that make you anxious in life. So you've now got the list and you want to try and challenge yourself. So for me, when it came down to cleaning my hands quite a lot, the challenge was not to clean my hands before having a meal. And this made me really anxious, because I thought, I'm dirty, I'm really dirty. If I put something in my mouth that has touched this dirty hand, I'm going to become insanely ill. And this is an irrational thought, because 99 times out of 100 it won't happen. It just won't. So I then went on to think, how can I go challenging this? And so I decided that I would buy a sandwich and I would eat it, without cleaning my hands beforehand. And this, obviously made me insanely anxious. So I did what I thought was best, and I asked my friend to support me along with it. And it was quite comforting in a sense to know that I had someone there. And, I could fall back on them, but I could also look upon them almost in an idyllic sense of view, that this is what I want to be. I want to ultimately be normal like they are. So let's get over it. And, I went on to try and eat this sandwich, and I did it. And you know what happened? I didn't become ill. And this just highlighted to me that the anxiety that I experienced was irrational. It gave me proof, in a way, that what I was doing was completely irrational. And so I could then go on to performing a more difficult challenge, because I knew that nothing would happen. And it's important to do it again and again to convince yourself, because the problem is with this anxiety, you might just think, this was a one-off. And by doing it again and again, you just highlight that this wasn't a one-off. This anxiety is completely irrational, and hey presto, you've just overcome this anxiety. It is an amazing feeling to know that this was irrational. I can now perform a normal behaviour just like my friend. And once you've then surmounted that challenge, you can then go on to the thing that's next on your list. And what you'll then find is that it's you're less anxious all in all, but B, it's not as difficult a challenge as you previously thought, because you've given yourself evidence that some of the behaviours that you perform are anxiety induced. So you can almost question yourself already that this is anxiety induced, so I won't find it as difficult to surmount. So I've already given you the example of cleanliness and cleaning hands, and I'll give you another example that was related to the eating disorder itself. So when I was becoming iller and iller, I was restricting things from my diet, and that came with anorexia, I suppose. And so I was cutting things like chocolate, ice cream, just general fatty foods, but also other foods that I thought would make me bigger. And so on my road to recovery, I challenged myself by eating certain foods that I'd previously restricted from my diet. And one of those things was ice cream. And so I wanted to challenge that, and I did that maybe a month ago by buying a tub of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And I wanted to, have a normal portion of Ben & Jerry's ice cream after having, a meal that obviously was something that I didn't deem challenging anyway. And so I went on to take the scoop, put it in, and I ate it. And the anxiety that I experienced beforehand was there, but because I'd previously surmounted other abnormal behaviours, it was a lot easier for me to do it. And now that I've done it, eating ice cream isn't an issue for me. And you'll find this if you challenge your eating disorder thoughts by, by challenging specific components, you'll slowly begin to eat normally again. And I can only tell you this, I can't force you to believe it, but just trust me in it, that it does happen, and you can ultimately recover from this. If you've got any questions related to this, please send me questions via Twitter or in the comments section below, and I'll try and answer them in future videos. But for now, thanks for watching.